Imagine being a reader and finally seeing your family's history, your culture's artistry, and your own face reflected back at you in a story, not as a side note, but as the heart of the tale. For over 2 decades, our guest has been creating those vital mirrors for generations of readers. She has brought Korean history to life, from the ancient craft of pottery making in her Newbery medal winning A Single Shard to the painful struggles of the Japanese occupation in When My Name Was Kyoko. She is not just an award winning author, she is a guardian of history. Please welcome a master of storytelling and a steadfast defender of intellectual freedom, the brilliant, the essential, Linda Sue Park.
Thank you. That was a wonderful introduction.
Your novel, A Long Walk to Water, is based on the true story of Salva, one of the lost boys who fled civil war in Sudan and later returned to what is now South Sudan in East Africa to bring clean water to his people. What's extraordinary is what happened after the book came out. Real students across the country were so moved that they raised more than $1 million to support that same mission. When you first wrote this story, did you imagine a children's book could lead to that kind of real world change? How did this all begin?
I'll update you a little bit. The total is now more than $4 million. So
4x. That's crazy.
right. Yes. No, when I first wrote the book, I was imagining it as sort of an example to young people about how one person can make a difference, that usual adage. And they are the ones who surprised me. They went to their adults, their teachers, parents, librarians, and said, how can we help? And that was just incredible to me. That was just, I never expected that. And they're responsible now, the readers of Long Walk to Water who have helped Salva raise money, they're responsible for hundreds of wells, serving literally millions of people in South Sudan. And just, I never imagined that. And it made me realize that we have this incredibly overlooked resource in this country in terms of activism, which is the power that young people have to nag their adults into doing the right thing. And that is exactly what has happened with A Long Walk to Water.
Many of your stories are inspired by real people and real injustices. How do you balance telling a story that's true to its emotional core while still carrying a message that might change how the readers see the world?
These distinctions get a little bit foggy because I think all good writers do some of all of it. But I would say that in general, I'm a character-driven author, right? What matters to me is the character. So the plot can go in any different direction when you're writing true fiction, right? And that what guides me is what would this character do here? What would they choose? What would their choice of action be here? So if you're basing it on a true story, for example, Salva's story, I don't have that luxury. I can't say what would Salva do here? I wonder what Salva would do here. No, what I have is what Salva actually did in that case, right? And so what I'm trying to do though is the same kind of thing, which is to stay as close to him as I can so that he feels really real, even though he is a real person, still that he feels very real to the reader. And that is one of the things that I get most often is that, is this a true story? Or I love this because it's a true story. I think that, especially these days, there's just so much going on that makes it difficult for not just young people, but for their adults also to tell what the truth is. And we're all hungering for that. What is the truth here? And so to try to stay close to that emotional truth, and in the case of Salva's story, the factual truth as well. So it depends very much on what I'm actually writing, but in Salva's case, very much trying to stick to what actually did happen to him.
Would you say it's easier to write about a real person or a fictional character?
No, way harder to write about a real person. Again, for me, one of the reasons that I write fiction is because I get to go wherever I want. And I'm more limited when I'm writing about a real person, in I think a good way, of course, if it's going to be nonfiction. But I couldn't just say, let's have him do this here, which I can do if it's fiction. So the awareness also that no matter how hard you try to get at the factual bare bones truth, you're going to fail because unless you're there at the moment with cameras from 6 different angles and a tape recorder and point of view of every single person watching, right? It's going to be impossible. So the object is to do the very best you can, and kind of like the physicians say, do no harm, to try to make sure that if you are not sure of something, that you leave it out, that you just don't put it in, because, everything that happens in A Long Walk to Water is something I was sure of. It was something I was sure really happened to Salva, or through my research, I was quite sure that it was something that really did happen, and so forth. It was actually a relief after writing A Long Walk to Water to get back to making everything up. For in Salva's case, anything that happened, for example, the students ask me, did that really happen to Uncle? Did that really happen to Mariel, his friend? Yeah, I didn't make any of that up. Those are actual events, right? What is fictionalized is I was interviewing Salva 20 years after the events in the book, right? What is my memory of what happened 20 years ago? Salva is talking to somebody in the book. He told me, well, I said to the old woman this, and she said this to me. He doesn't remember the exact words. There was no tape recorder, right? So he told me the essence of the conversation and invented the words, staying true to that, what he told me. Like, she offered me peanuts to eat or whatever it was. I stayed true to what actually happened, but I made up the dialogue. There's another scene where Salva is confronted by a soldier who tells him to go stand in the line with the women and children, not with the men, because he's only 11 years old. And he didn't know what he should do. Should he go with the men? Should he go with the women, right? And the soldier told him, you go over there with the women and children. So that conversation I invented. Salva told me what happened, but I put words in their mouths, right? So I don't know what you'd say about percentage that way. That's a really hard number to put on it. But I would like, once again, to think that the actual events happened and I stayed as true as I could to the emotional truth there. He was terrified, right? He was afraid of the soldier and what he should do. And so I hope that the scene that I wrote captures that truth.
You grew up in Illinois as one of the only Korean families in your town, and you've said that books helped you feel less alone, offering a window into a wider world. What role do you think stories play for young readers today who are trying to find belonging or identity in such a divided world?
Well, I think, or at least I hope, that everybody by now who cares about kids and books knows how important it is for kids to see themselves in a story, in stories, plural, hopefully. When you see a character who's like yourself, it has so many messages. It says, I see you. It says, you matter. You're important enough to be in literature. It says, you're not alone. Those are all very powerful things for young people to hear about themselves. I see you matter. You're not alone. So that is true of every reader and every book. But for me, writing books about characters from so-called marginalized communities, it is just as important for the majority community to read those books. So a well-meaning librarian might say to me, I just love having your books. I give them to all my Asian kids, and I'm like, great. Do you also give them to all your non-Asian kids, right? And the example I like to use is not far from the truth that for decades and decades, imagine that almost every book in the kids section of the library featured a boy as the main character. And there was an occasional girl or a female character, and they were either a perfect princess or a wicked evil stepmother. All right. And so some smart librarians thought, okay, this is not right. Girls need to see themselves more in books. So you don't just get in one or two books starring girl characters, you get dozens and hundreds of them, because there need to be as many books featuring a variety of girl characters as there are boy characters. And of course, the girls need that. They need the I see you matter, you're not alone. The boys need those books too. The boys need to realize that not every girl is a perfect princess or an evil stepmother, right? The boys need just as much and maybe even more to read those books and to see examples of the great variety of girls and women and female characters, just as they've always had that great variety in books featuring boys. So that's the example I like to use when we're talking about books with characters of different ethnicities, of different gender choices, of different socioeconomic choices, right, or classes. We need the greatest range and variety of books possible, because that's what kids are. They're not all the same. They're a tremendous variety and range. and we need books for all of them.
Children's and young adult books are increasingly being challenged or banned across the country, including books about race, immigration, and history. As an author who's written across cultures and generations, what goes through your mind when you see those efforts try to silence certain books?
We need a few hours, but the main thing that I would say to people is that this is not about books. They say it's about books, right? But it's not about books. It's about choice and power. Because if it was about protecting kids from things you don't want kids to see, there would be way more energy being poured into video games and the internet, right? Compared to the number of hours kids spend in books, it doesn't even measure up, right? If you really cared about what kids were seeing, that's where your efforts would be. But no, they're in books for many reasons. But one of the things to remember is that this is about power. This is about people wanting to control what you get to read, what your kids get to read, what other people's kids get to read. I have absolutely zero problem with parents who want to be involved with their children's lives and who say, I don't want my kid to read that particular book. In every school district I have ever visited, which is hundreds, there is a mechanism for that in place already. You can go to the teacher, you can go to the librarian, you say, I don't want my kid to read this book. A replacement book will be chosen for them. They do not have to read it. That is every parent's right. Okay? But this isn't about that. This is about a group of people saying, we want to control what you read, what you choose. We want to control that. It's not about books, it's about power. And that's what I would wish people would understand.
You've said that great books don't just entertain us, they help us practice life. What do you think literature teaches us about empathy, resilience, and fairness that adults sometimes forget?
Right. I think that when you read, again, a wide range of books, not just one or two, when you read a wide variety of books, you see a wide variety of choices that people make in these stories. And sometimes they're good choices, and sometimes they're bad choices. You can't be what you can't see. So if you see characters in books making poor choices, which in good books they always do, perhaps you'll think to yourself, I wonder if I would have chosen differently. If you see them making good choices, same. Maybe I would have done that too. One of the things I love most about A Long Walk to Water response is what a hero Salva becomes to these readers. And some schools have even adopted the motto WWSD means what would Salva do? Right? Isn't that awesome? So they think about him and his courage and how he just never lost hope no matter what was happening. And in the classroom, they say to each other, what would Salva do here? Right? So that's just a perfect example of how reading books can help us in practicing life and in real life.
Wait, that's so cool. I haven't heard of that. Cool model to stand by.
Absolutely.
What I love about this interview is how it reminds us that stories don't end on the last page. They ripple outward into classrooms, into conversations, into real change, and even into this interview. Linda Sue Park has shown us that when people read with empathy, they don't just imagine a better world, they start building it. And that's the kind of quiet revolution literature is capable of, especially in a time where so many stories are being silenced or erased. So, to every reader, educator, or parent listening, keep putting books into young hands, keep defending their right to explore, question, and to dream. Linda Sue, thank you for all your work, your words, and for reminding us that a story can be both a mirror and map.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much for your work.
Thank you so much for your time.
Okay.